Welcome back to the Republic Brothers Podcast. I'm Mike, he's Matt. Today's January 25th, 2026, and this is episode 30. We've got a packed update segment today. A lot has happened since our last episode. We're breaking down the latest developments out of Minnesota. We're also checking in on Iran, where the regime's crackdown continues and leadership appears to be retreating into hiding. And we'll touch on the renewed push by the Trump administration regarding Greenland. There's a lot to get into. Let's get started. Here we go. Let's start with our updates. Since the last episode, one of the most explosive developments coming out of the ongoing ICE protest centers on the story of a 5-year-old boy in Minnesota. And the biggest story is about the way the left-wing media is trying to frame this. Some outlets rush to paint a shocking picture implying that federal agents arrested a child or used him as bait. And that's simply just not what happened. Here's the real story. ICE was conducting a lawful targeted operation to arrest an adult subject with outstanding immigration violations. According to the Department of Homeland Security, as agents approached the man's vehicle, he ran away and abandoned his 5-year-old son in the family's driveway. Because the father abandoned his child in the chaos of the attempted arrest, officers made the decision to stay with the boy to ensure his safety while the father was taken into custody. Critics and some local officials are pushing a narrative that ICE targeted the child or maliciously used him as a pawn. But federal officials have repeatedly denied that claim, stressing that the child was not the subject of the operation and that their priority was protecting him once he was left alone. What were they supposed to do? Leave a 5-year-old out in the snow in his driveway?
I saw reports that said they knocked on the kid's parents' door and they wouldn't answer because it was ICE.
Yeah, they had the kid knock on the door to see if there was someone there that could care for him. They weren't using the child as bait. Vice President J.D. Vance, speaking on the ground in Minneapolis, echoed the same thing. This misunderstanding has become a flashpoint because it feeds into a broader left-wing narrative that federal immigration enforcement is cruel and indiscriminate. But when you strip away the sensational headlines and look at the sequence of events and the actual explanations, the reality is that this was a complex situation involving an adult who chose to flee and leave his child behind. This was not a case of ICE arresting a 5-year-old or setting out to exploit him to make a political point. I just don't understand why these people have to lie all the time.
This was not a misunderstanding from the left. They know what happened, but they don't care. When the first shooting that involved ICE happened in Minnesota, the mayor and the governor rushed to the podium to try and get out in front of this and push their own narrative. They did not wait for facts. They ran out to get a story out that they wanted out there because the facts don't matter, the narrative does. It was a convenient way to get some of the attention off all the fraud in their state and move it to a different topic. We have seen time and time again when something happens, they will rush to an opinion before any facts are known. They saw a child with ICE and ran with a story that would go against ICE. They go against ICE at every chance they can. This is similar to me to what we saw in the summer of love of 2020. Defunding the police was the stupidest thing a political party has ever come up with, but it looks like the left has not learned their lesson. They hate the institutions so much they will go back to the well to try to destroy it. These are the political elites. They all have security teams that are there to protect them whenever anything happens. They cannot comprehend the average person's life when something goes wrong. When things go wrong, people call 911. The same people they protested and rioted to defund are the people who show up when you are desperate. When your life is on the line, you call these people because they run towards the danger when everyone else runs away.
Yeah, this is a clear pattern from the left. They jump to the microphone before the facts are in because to them, the narrative matters more than the truth. Anytime ICE or law enforcement is involved, they assume guilt first and facts later. Unfortunately, we just had another shooting on the morning of January 24, 2026. Yesterday morning, federal immigration enforcement agents were conducting an operation in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and during the operation, a U.S. Border Patrol agent shot and killed a 37-year-old Minneapolis resident, Alex Jeffrey Priddy. Federal officials, including the Department of Homeland Security, stated that Priddy was armed with a legally owned handgun and that agents fired in response to what they described as a threat. Video footage and bystander accounts shared publicly showed a sequence in which the agents engaged with him and others on the street. In parts of the footage, agents are seen deploying a chemical agent and wrestling him to the ground shortly before multiple shots were fired.
They did deploy chemical agents against protesters. It did not look like it was specifically targeting Priddy. What you can see from the video is the agents try to detain him. Then they all back up, with at least one of them pulling their firearm and shooting. There is a lot going on, and we need a full investigation to figure out exactly what happened. But you do not interfere with law enforcement. I will reserve full judgment on the law enforcement side of this until we know exactly what happened. Looking at this from the individual perspective and Priddy's perspective, if he was not there, he would still be alive. I would bet anything he could not have told you who ICE was targeting in this operation. There was no real reason for him to be there. I have said this is all because they see the illegal immigrants as potential Democrat voters, and I'm not alone in that feeling. Ex-Minnesota Vikings captain Jack Brewer has accused Minneapolis authorities of protecting illegals in the city and said Democrats opposed ICE because they were deporting their voters.
Huh.
He even called for a citywide mental health assessment because people have lost touch with reality.
Well, we'll circle back to that, but I also want to bring up the arrests that were made after that church was disrupted in Minnesota. In St. Paul, Minnesota, federal authorities arrested 3 individuals in connection with a protest that took place inside City's Church on January 18, 2026. The demonstration occurred during a Sunday service and was organized to draw attention to concerns about federal immigration enforcement policies and the alleged role of one of the church's pastors, who was reported to also serve as a local ICE official. I'm not even going to try to pronounce their names, plus I don't think they deserve any more attention. One of them is a civil rights attorney and community activist. Sounds like a great job. Another is a local school board member. What are you even doing there? And the last one is a social media personality. They were arrested on January 22nd. Federal officials charged the 3 with offenses related to interfering with the rights of others and obstructing access to a house of worship under a statute originally enacted in 1994. Prosecutors allege the defendants played key roles in organizing and leading the protests that disrupted religious services. A judge declined to allow charges against Don Lemon, who was also present and live-streamed that protest, concluding that his actions were protected by the First Amendment. Now, I want you to imagine his outrage if someone showed up to his wedding and then proceeded to disrupt it by shouting about gay marriage and then claimed that he hadn't done anything wrong because, obviously, the First Amendment. And of course, the judge isn't innocent in all this. The judge's wife works for Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. How convenient is that? I like the arrest, though. We talked about this on the last episode. Now Trump's administration needs to keep going and keep making arrests. Do not back down now.
We've said this before, but just imagine this happened in a mosque.
Yeah.
They would be losing their minds.
Absolutely.
All of these so-called protests have ultimately led to Trump's top officials blaming Minnesota Democrats for inciting the anti-ICE protests and the chaos that has led to the deaths of 2 protesters. The Trump administration officials claim immigration authorities have faced unprecedented obstacles since arriving in the state. Kristi Noem told Fox News, "We saw a resistance in Minneapolis like we haven't seen anywhere else in the country." She said this was sparked by widespread fraud by the immigrant community, but Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey encouraged radicals to take to the streets and resist law enforcement. As we have both kind of stressed, this is all avoidable. I've said this before, I do not understand why anyone would interfere with law enforcement when it comes to someone they do not even know. You like to say they are your neighbors, but you do not know any of them, so they are not your neighbors. Think about this from the individual perspective. Both of these protesters would be alive if they simply did not show up. The left likes to claim that ICE is a very dangerous and rogue agency, but if that were the case, you would not go out and get in their way. Look at the protests in Iran. How did that end? The Iranians are dealing with way worse than we are, but the protesters stopped protesting because they knew their lives were in danger. Actual danger, otherwise they would still be out protesting.
There have been 2 separate fatal shootings by federal immigration agents in just a couple weeks, and that has intensified the tensions on the ground. Federal officials have defended the agents' actions, saying they fired in self-defense during enforcement operations. From a broader view here, when law enforcement is trying to carry out its mission and encounters active large protests, the risk of violence skyrockets. That's not unique to this moment, and it's why many are arguing that restoration of order and clear coordination between federal, state, and local authorities are essential. When Tim Walz gets behind a microphone and blames Trump for these shootings, he's full of crap. Now, maybe this sounds insensitive, but it needs to be said, just like you said before. Whether you believe law enforcement should have shot those people or not, the cold hard truth is that they brought it on themselves. They made a series of decisions that led to those actions from law enforcement. I have not seen one person standing on a sidewalk holding a sign get shot. Not one person peacefully protesting has been killed. That is not a coincidence.
Yes, and do they know anything about Trump? If Trump pulls ICE out of Minnesota now, it will send a message to all liberal cities that violent protests will force ICE out. Do they really think Trump will let that be the message? Wildly stupid on behalf of the leaders of Minnesota. The hatred of Trump seems to blind them to the way Trump thinks. The left loves to look at people they disagree with as the enemy, but if you want to beat the enemy, it helps to know how they think. That has been one of my biggest criticisms of Trump. He can't figure out how Vladimir Putin thinks. The left can't figure it out with Trump.
Yeah, these people need to take a step back and realize that all Tim Walz is doing is trying to get them to fight his fight for him. He's just trying to get you to go out there and be the dummy that gets ran over in the crash test. Just stay out of the way.
And the longer this goes, the better for him, because that's less people talking about all the fraud in Minnesota.
Yep.
Well, since I mentioned Iran not long ago, we'll move on to our next subject. I wanted to touch on this subject as this story is likely not over. We know the Ali Khamenei regime has cracked down on the protesters hard, but much more is likely to come. Large gatherings have been forced off public streets after heavy responses from the military. We have seen widespread detentions, bans on gatherings, and violent attacks on the families of protesters and witnesses. This crackdown has seen nearly everyone targeted, including children. Local health officials have said the crackdown may have resulted in as many as 30,000 deaths, far higher than any earlier count. The New York Times reported that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei instructed security forces to crush the demonstrators by any means necessary. Unnamed officials inside the regime said the leaders told the security forces to, quote, shoot to kill and show no mercy. Internet and power are still being limited, but I say all this to inform you that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has reportedly gone underground in fear of a U.S. airstrike. The 86-year-old leader has moved to a fortified bunker in Tehran after senior military officials warned him of a potential military strike from the U.S. Khamenei has left his youngest son in charge of running the Islamic Republic. Masoud Khamenei, 53, will run the country on a day-to-day basis. The supreme leader is not the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, but that is how you know this democracy is fake. The elected officials report to the unelected supreme leaders. weird that the left does not go out and protest the dictator who has never had to win an election to be the leader, despite the fact that they're so against kings. Iran has deemed the likelihood of a U.S. airstrike as high after Trump deployed warships to the Middle East, following warnings and a war of words between the leaders that saw Trump warn Iran not to harm protesters. The Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group has moved into the Persian Gulf region, meaning a strike from the U.S. on any part of the regime is possible. We have seen from previous actions taken by the U.S. that our military is better than everyone else's, by an order of magnitude. It is important to note here that the regime has not and will not back down from the war of words with the U.S. They can't, as it will be seen as a sign of weakness. Maintaining power is the only thing that really matters for autocrats. The fact they went into hiding really shows just how capable their military is. The supreme leader of Iran is usually very active on X, but has been very quiet of late. The last time there was a conflict with any nation that had a real military, Khamenei went into hiding for 2 weeks, which was during the war with Israel. He was apparently so worried then that he even made a list of successors. All of this is to say, we will talk about this again because nothing has changed in the day-to-day lives of normal Iranian people, and Trump promising help from the U.S. might actually arrive.
What stands out to me is how quickly this story disappeared from the global spotlight, even as the conditions inside Iran are getting worse. Reports of mass detentions and attacks on families suggest the regime is prioritizing survival over any concern for their public legitimacy. If the senior leadership really has gone into hiding, that signals fear. What comes next? The underlying pressure inside the country clearly hasn't gone away. So why do Democrats criticize everything Donald Trump does, but they don't say anything about the authoritarian government in Iran?
Mostly because they are for themselves. There are two main reasons, in my opinion. One, every win for Trump is a loss to them because any win for Trump helps the Republicans, and they see it as something harmful to getting themselves elected. Two, and the less common opinion on the left, they want to see the destruction of Western civilization. That is why we are told that the U.S. is the evil one and Hamas are just a peaceful group of victims. The objective is the destruction of the Western world by any means necessary.
Do you think these protests are going to ramp up again at some point, or do you think everybody's just scared to death at this point?
It's tough to say exactly what's going to happen. The U.S. would have to do something dramatic to reignite this protest. Fear is a very powerful feeling, and that is what has pushed people into hiding. If Trump ordered strikes against the leaders of the country, yes, you would see protests again, but I'm not sure that's coming. There is also a scenario that Trump could take out a lot of the security forces' ability to crack down on the protesters, and that might get them back out, but it's tough to say at this point. What we do know is the protests will start again, but when is a complete unknown. As we have said, the conditions that led to this protest are still there. When it restarts is anyone's guess, but it will at some point. All right, let's move on to our next update. We have to talk about Greenland again. The Trump administration continues its push to acquire the island territory from Denmark. There's not a lot of major changes on this front. The main difference this time is the Trump administration saying they have agreed to a framework deal with NATO to acquire the land. That is an interesting statement from the Trump administration, as NATO does not own Greenland. Denmark and Denmark alone owns Greenland, and NATO cannot agree to give away something it does not own. Danish leaders, as well as Greenland's leaders, continue to say the island is not for sale. So let's do a quick recap. Trump wants Greenland. Trump is not the first U.S. president to attempt this. Denmark says it's not for sale. Also not the first time they have said that. The difference this time is Trump So NATO is scared of what Trump will do. Trump reassured the West he will not use military force, so markets went up, as many contractors in the West who supply the military are not currently set up to increase production, which is what it would take if the U.S. were to enter a conflict. Trump announced tariffs, but has since backed down on the tariff threat, but still has interest in Greenland. In other words, who knows what President Trump will do? Everything is still on the table. I will remind everyone of my position. To me, it simply is not worth it still. We can already have everything we want from the military and strategic side of it, but Trump seems to see more value in the oil and minerals than I do. I will also remind everyone, if Trump wants to take Greenland, he will, and he can. There is no nation in the world that could stop him. This is Trump knowing he controls the best military in the history of the planet, and he is using that to his advantage. This does strain U.S.-Europe relations, but those were strained on November 5th, 2024, the day Trump got reelected.
Yeah, this doesn't seem to be about impulse for Donald Trump. He's been consistent for years that Greenland matters. Markets reacting to Trump's reassurance about no military force doesn't mean that he backed down. It means he clarified his boundaries, but he's still keeping the pressure on. So is this outrage really about Greenland, or is once again it all about Donald Trump?
It's mostly about Trump, and it is about how he has challenged some of the global elites. Many NATO countries are ticked off that Trump is trying to make them pay for their own defense. He's also trying to manage fair trade deals, which the U.S. has not had with even our greatest allies. The reason you see Mercedes and BMWs in our country is because they are a really good product. There are no Chevys and Fords in Germany, not because they're bad products, but because they're not as good as the German cars, but because of tariffs by Germany, they're priced the same. The German car was a better product at the same price, so that's what people bought. It has been like that with many things. Trump is challenging that, and that hurts those countries while helping the U.S. Trump is America first. That doesn't mean you don't interact with the rest of the world. He does things that he feels will benefit America. And I don't always agree that they are the best for America, but you can't blame the guy for trying.
He's certainly doing more than most politicians do when they get elected president. I think that's a main thing that most people say anytime they vote for somebody. Within a year or two, they're saying, oh, this guy's not doing anything that he told me he was going to do. But Trump is trying to do and has pretty much done everything he said he's going to do.
Most politicians roll over for the people of Europe out of fear that they won't be on our side. It might shock people to hear that they need us far more than we need them. Now, we're getting close to wrapping up here, but I wanted to end it on a somewhat funny note. For anyone who looks up to the political elite in the West, just know demand for sex workers in Davos while the World Economic Forum was going on skyrocketed. Requests for, quote, erotic services increased by a staggering 4,000% on January 19th, the day the World Economic Forum started. The New York Post reported that Swiss dating platform Tit for Tat saw requests for services soar the day that the conference started. The platform said they saw around 2 requests per day prior to the conference, but that number is up to nearly 80 requests per day during the conference. Most of those bookings come from the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine. That includes one client who reportedly shelled out $114,000 for 4 days with 5 women. Anytime you consider looking up to the political elite, remember this story because they are not as virtuous as you may think.
That is disgusting, to say the least.
$114,000.
Oh, my goodness. Imagine what his strip club bill normally is. He's just been waiting to spend that money.
That $114,000 doesn't include all the drinks and all the food and the hotels he bought.
That's crazy. You want to know what's even crazier is I bet whatever company or so, I guarantee you that 114 grand didn't come out of his own pocket.
I would also be willing to bet this individual was almost certainly a man, and I would bet just about anything he had a wife.
I'd put money on that too. All right, well, we are at the end of the show here. Of course, that means our blind ranking segment. Today, Matt's going to be ranking the best countries to live in, blind ranking from 1 to 5. Once he locks it in, he cannot change it. Matt, your first country is France.
I'm going to rate these based on how I think other people would rate it. You said best countries to live in.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go with generalizations here and assume everyone would feel this way.
Okay.
I'm going to put France at number 2.
Number 2, okay. Next up, you got Canada.
Similar tax policy, similar immigration status, colder weather, so 3.
3, okay. Next, you got Spain.
Spain is a good one, but taxes are very high. 55% for those wondering.
Ouch.
I feel like something better is coming, so I'm going to put it 4 and hope I got that right.
Okay. Next up, you have Wales.
Oh, that's number 5. Crap weather, crap taxes, bad immigration policies from the government, bad everything. No thanks.
All right. And in your number 1 spot, you have Ireland.
That should be number 6 because they're worse at all of it. Go look up Conor McGregor's rants many times over the last 5 years. He'll let you. He is not wrong on the immigration side of things. They are an absolute disaster.
All right, well, that's it for episode 30 of the Republic Brothers podcast. If you're still listening, you're exactly who this podcast is for. Before you click away, hit the subscribe and follow button. New episodes drop every Monday and Thursday. If you agree or disagree with anything we talked about, drop a comment and let us know. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.